Hey, I'm Sarah Inman, and I'm excited to be here with you and be a part of this conversation and 6 conversations that we're going to be a part of, just listening to people and learning from them. I'm with an organization for Evansville, and really we are just trying to help people not just be in the city of Evansville, but be for Evansville. And one of the ways that we do that is we want to pursue human flourishing, the good of the city through the church. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is one, listening to stories. We're storytellers. We have a lot of opportunity to listen to people through our own podcast and a lot of other ways that we've been able to tell stories over the years. But also, we know that some of the avenues and pathways that are happening in our city, we want to celebrate and connect more people to those. And one of those is neighborhood revitalization. Austin, what is this Love Your Neighborhood conversation that we're jumping into?
Yes, and my name is Austin Maxheimer, and I am the Neighborhood Revitalization Director for Community One, who we oversee Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and then coach other neighborhood-based organizations in that. And probably the simplest way that we explain that is that we want to our organization wants to help neighbors love neighbors. And we do that through neighborhood revitalization because neighborhoods are just full of neighbors. And so there's some areas in our cities and our communities that have experienced difficulties or barriers to flourishing, as Sarah said. And we believe that those neighborhoods or areas of our town are full of amazing neighbors that can be the change they want to see. And that's the heart of Love Your Neighborhood initiative. But the work itself is not widespread or well done, this idea of assets-based community development. And so we've been practicing it and failing and learning and growing for a few years now in the work. And so we thought it was time to kind of collect up all the practitioners in the ground who have been doing Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and learning from them. So you're going to hear stories, you're going to hear best practices, you're going to hear learnings. But these are people that are in the work, doing it every day in and day out. And we thought we could create a community of learners. And so we're inviting you as potential neighborhood-based organizations that are interested in the Love Your Neighborhood initiative to sit back and learn and grow and contribute your own voice to this. And so that's what these 6 sessions are all about. And we look forward to you guys interacting with us and learning and being co-conspirators in this great idea of creating flourishing neighborhoods. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in and learn from a neighborhood. Welcome to the Love Your Neighborhood podcast. We're going to do 6 sessions on helping you as practitioners engage in neighborhood revitalization work that is focused on activating and restoring marginalized neighbors in your community. And we just want to help you in very practical ways to start and continue in this work. And this session is a little different than the other ones. We're going to be focusing specifically on the faith community, the Christian faith community, and mobilizing them. But Eric is our guest today, and he's perfectly situated to have this conversation. He spent over 10 years on staff as a church staff person, driving this work forward, helping his church participate in neighborhood work. But then he also spent over 10 years in nonprofit leadership as well, seeing the work as being a platform for engagement for the faith community into neighborhoods. And so besides that, Eric is also just a personal friend. He's been a mentor to me. I've been able to be a co-worker with him in the work itself. And so it's just a joy to have you with us, Eric. Thank you for joining us for this session.
It is great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, we're going to jump right in and we're going to get to it. So I wanted to start with kind of those beginning days of being on staff at a church, helping people in the local church body engage and connect to the work. What were the original genesis of going from a church-centric approach to being in the neighborhood? What was that journey like, if you could share those early days?
Absolutely, and I'll try not to go too far back so this doesn't become a very long podcast. But my first few years that I did serve at a local church, I was really engaged mostly in what I would call kind of internal ministry, guest ministries, internal connections ministry, things that helped people find their way around inside of the church and serve inside of the church and do things that edified and built up the body of Christ, which are important things. And it was about 4 to 5 years into my tenure that there were some leadership changes and some shifting of people around on staff. And I didn't go seeking this role, but the role of local outreach pastor found me. And I got to be honest with you, it wasn't one that I was really excited about. And I think I wasn't excited about it mostly because I didn't understand it. I didn't know what to do. So it was a bit of a position I was thrust into, but it came with some freedom. And I was told, start over, get a clean sheet, figure this out, start with Scripture. What are we supposed to be doing? Learn our community, what the needs are, what that looks like, and then let's start building from there. So it was wonderful to have the freedom to just kind of clean sheet the whole thing and start over. I don't know if a lot of people get that opportunity in the church staff community. And then I think there were several things that we did. One was we did some low-hanging fruit. We had many community and regional partners that we were supporting financially. There were all sorts of things going on. So we really just kind of sat down and said, who are the organizations and the nonprofits and groups that are most aligned with our values at the church? We can whittle this down from 30 people that we're helping to support, maybe to the 5 or 6 most important values-aligned partners that we had at the church. So we did that. And those nonprofit organizations, some were doing, what I call relief-based work. Some were doing maybe reconstruction or rehab type work. And some were starting to get into this idea of the restoration end of the spectrum, which is what we call place-based work in neighborhoods. But we solidified those relationships. I invited the directors of those organizations to be in community with us at the church. We'd meet every month. We'd have lunch together. And we just started building a relationship together and understanding the work and what was going on. And we really just kind of cemented them in as our local partners. And so it was easy to say, hey, mobilization is going to look like engage with these local partners. They're doing things that share our values and are really easy on-ramps into service in our community across the spectrum of needs. And in addition to that, we realized that, gosh, I don't know if our people are really equipped to be able to understand what's going on in our community. What does the community look like? What is our role in the community? And so we started doing, and this is a little bit controversial, but it worked for us, was we started doing not only educational programs about social and biblical justice and things like that, but we started doing what I just called van tours. I'd take 10 or 15 church members at a time, and we did this every month as well. And I had a little handful of drivers, and I'd rent a van, and we would just drive through the city. And we'd drive to where all of our partners were, their locations. We'd pray over their work, and then we'd tell the story along the way about what does poverty really, look like in our community? What are the things that people are struggling with? What is the physical condition of our community? What's happening? So, and I really felt that was some of the best work that we did, was to take people to places that they'd never been before, to kind of demystify, to kind of put some reality to the pictures that people had conjured up in their minds, which were inaccurate, and just to start to humanize and personalize the needs of our community. And along with that educational process, we also entered into a year of prayer. And so we connected to some smaller African-American churches that were located in center city areas, inside the urban areas, far away from our suburban church. And just tried to have a sense of humility about that, to go and say, look, we want to be engaged in a meaningful way. We realize that we've been absent from the community for a long time. We don't really know what we're doing. Can we just, what should we do? And their response was, let's pray. So we got together on a regular basis for almost a year and moved from one small church to another church on a weekly basis. And we just prayed that the Lord would show us the way that it would to engage and where to engage. So we went before the Lord with the question, and put new friends around the table who had insights that we didn't have. And so through the process of all of that, we started to get a better picture of what was happening in our community. It took a while. We had to invest time and energy in this. We had to be persistent. We had to persevere in training and tours. We had to persevere in partnerships. We had to keep, sending the message. And then I had to kind of get as best I could, into the pulpit as well. I wasn't the primary teacher at the church. I was quite far down the list, as a matter of fact. And we were working inside of a church culture that was very tractional. And so, and it had a kind of this older prevailing idea that, we'll talk about serving one weekend a year and it'll be a big serve weekend. It's like, but what we really need is 52 sermons a year on what it means to be the church in our community. So we had to kind of figure our way and feel our way the best we could through getting that. And there was a lot of voices trying to get pulpit time as well. So that was a challenge to navigate that as well. But over time and through our partnerships, through our prayer, through our presence in the community, we started to see and started to form this idea of how do you engage specifically in a place and to try to make change over time. We had a partner at the time that was leading a new initiative in an urban neighborhood. There was some energy around that. There were no churches involved in it at the time, but we really felt through our prayer and through our just kind of testing where God would have us go that we really felt a strong calling to step into this, what we would just call neighborhood work. And there's a lot of physical change, housing, and all sorts of things that happen in neighborhoods when restoration like that comes. But there's also engagement in schools. There's loving people. There's, kind of just being in the neighborhood with people. And so that's what we did. We stepped into the initiative, said, hey, we're going to make a commitment. We're going to be part of this neighborhood. We're going to be part of this local school. We're going to do this, and we're going to keep coming. And we're not going to stop coming. We're going to come until they throw us out of the neighborhood. That was a whole new idea too, because we, sometimes serving the community feels like a military strike. It's like, we're going to go do some good right here, and then we're going to pull out, and then we're going to go do some good here, and then we're going to pull out. The idea of anchoring into a community of people, even when you don't know them well, but for the purpose of getting to know them and being a friend and a partner and a presence, was something completely new. But we felt it was something we had to do. So we made a commitment to the neighborhood. We made a commitment to that initiative. We made a commitment to the local school. And we just came to the neighborhood and we said yes to everything we were asked to do. Yeah. And that way we started to build relationship. And over time we started to build trust. And it just started to feel like it was part of what we were really missing and what we should have been doing. You can have partnerships. You should work with nonprofits. We should do these things because they really are kind of experts in the work, and they're quick ways to get into important work. But there needs to be that kind of heart level commitment that we're going to be involved in a place or places, and people will learn to trust us, and they can count on us, and we'll be a partner in what needs to be done there in loving people. So that was kind of the journey, and it took a few years to kind of say that, our partnerships, and our presence in the neighborhood and our education and just bringing our people along and talking about that was really how we entered into, the idea of neighborhood-based, place-based work.
Yeah, that is so rich. Thanks for opening it up that way. And as you participate in Love Your Neighborhood work, you'll hear many of the principles that Eric just told through that opening story, being proximate to people, drawing near to them, not coming with an agenda, listening first, finding what's already going on in the community and building on the momentum there. Those are all crucial parts to seeing a neighborhood initiative get underway. So let's go to the individual people now that you are helping mobilize, okay? So there's the organizational effort that you were transforming or redirecting maybe, or renewing, or giving a new frame for. But then there was the individual people within the church that you were helping to create on-ramps to bring engagement. Let's start with some of the barriers to mobilization. As you were helping and hoping that people from your church body would integrate into the work, what were some of the barriers that they faced to doing that?
That is a great question, and I'd like to pretend there weren't a lot.
We need to know all of them.
There's a few specific ones, and it's easy for me also to kind of cast a critical eye on the internal workings of the local church. I am an advocate for the local church. I love the local church. It's the bride of Christ. It is how God is going to accomplish his mission on earth. And so I don't want anybody to think that I'm like super critical in a way that I feel like something's broken. I think there's room for alignment, realignment, and rethinking, but I think that's true of every organization. But anyway, I will share with you some of the things that just were frustrating to me, or frustrating to people. I think one is seeing outreach as a program among many programs, as opposed to seeing engagement and outreach into our community as the sole purpose of the church. or one of the primary purposes of the church. And so when it's one among many, it gets resourced as one among many. It gets discussed or taught or engaged in as one among many. And so it's easy to kind of starve that type of idea if you view it as a program or as a thing that we do among many, many things. Instead of having an outreach team, what we should have had was an outreach expression in every existing ministry of the church. And so we know that teaching, equipping the saints for ministry, the community of the local church, discipleship, these are all elements that are really important, and they're the strength of the church, is ministering to the whole person, the whole family. But you can't do that without following Jesus, who was the ultimate place-based practitioner. Jesus did his work. He was not a stranger to the synagogue, but that's not where he spent all his time. He took what the Father taught him and he put it into action among the people that we read so much about in the Gospels and in Scripture. So I think, first of all, treating outreach as a program and not as the purpose is probably frustrating for people. And I don't know if it really helps people to understand ultimately the mission of their own lives, who God has made in them, made them to be, put into them. Without these external expressions, without these ways to express our faith in the world, I think we have an incomplete faith. We have an incomplete expression of our faith as well. And so I think that's a barrier to growth for people also. They're seeing a very shallow dimension of the church inside the walls and not the richness of the church engaging the culture and being present in the culture, which we see so much in the New Testament. So those were a few things from an internal perspective that I think were a little bit frustrating. Was just how we viewed the work itself as not part of the whole, but kind of like a piece of a series of programs. That would probably do a good job of summing up a lot of the challenges, and that then affects many other things that you would do. We do a lot of programming. It competes for people's time and attention, and if they see it as a thing they have to do in addition to the other things, it necessarily will fall down the list of priorities. But if they see it as a component of everything they do in their life, it's already built in. It's part of who they are. And I think that's the essence of love God and love your neighbor, is that's what we do as we go.
Did you, when you say that, and I hear that, and that it's amazing, is that something that you realized after you were in the work, or is that something you were already thinking before you started in it?
It's something that came to me, I think, over time through the work. I didn't really grab a hold of outreach ministry because I had a heart for neighborhoods and neighbors in marginalized places. That grew when I started to live the gospel and bring other people to those places and started to put feet on the ground, meet people, understand what's going on, and then look at that through the lens of the gospel. It's like, wait a minute, I had to. Again, I don't want to beat up the church, but I had to move my mind framework away from attracting people to the building to, using that precious time that we had to disciple and care for our church family, to equip them to send them away from the building so that, God could be manifest in the world. It's easy for people to drive by a church building and go, well, there's the building. I don't ever see those people. I don't know what's going on, but it's a great building. As opposed to, wow, these people are making a difference. They came to our neighborhood. They're here with us. They're listening to us. They're part of the story and the fabric of our community and what's going on. Those are two really very, very different things. I just want to share a story with you that maybe kind of illustrates this. I just had such a great experience on church. I loved working at the church too, and my brothers and sisters in Christ and the work. I mean, I loved and I trusted the hearts of everybody. Methods aside, everybody was on the right mission. But I remember being at the church a while back, and we're having kind of one of those weekends where they were kind of promoting outreach, promoting engagement, promoting kind of mission in the community. And they had coined a phrase that went along with it, just was like asking people, hey, what's your mission, kind of a thing. And I was there kind of volunteering and talking to people and gathering around, after services. And a lady who I had known for many years, who was so faithful, a faithful Christian woman who served in guest ministries and other things for years and years and years in the church, even under my leadership, doing some of that work. Terrific lady. And, she asked, she walks and said, well, hey, what's your mission? I said, well, my mission is to help people find their mission. In addition to the other thing, so we struck up a conversation and I asked her, say, what's your mission? She said, one thing I do is I get up every Monday morning, I get up early and get dressed and I pray that God would use me in some special way today to lighten the load for somebody, to bless somebody, to bring some joy to somebody. And then I get up and I go to the hospital and I go room to room and I pray with people, I sit with people. And these aren't like church members, it's like anybody. She just goes and volunteers to go pray with people at hospitals. And she does that regularly, week in and week out, and she does that. And she was telling me this story and I'm like, I'm just like taking this in. It's like, oh my goodness, this woman is so faithful and amazing and beautiful ministry that she's found on her own. And so she told me this story, and then she was finished with the story, and at the end she goes, but that doesn't count really because the pastor didn't tell me to do it.
Oh, no.
And I about fell down. I was like, no, that counts. That doesn't just count. That's it. It's the whole game. You've taken what God has put in you, you've asked him to multiply it and to make it a blessing to people, and you go into the presence of people who are weary and hurt and sick and burdened, and you pray for them and you sit with them. It's like, this is the essence of Christ himself. But in her mind, that statement just haunts me. It doesn't count because the pastor didn't ask me to do it. I hope that haunts pastors too. I don't know if they know that kind of influence that they have on people. And I don't mean that in a bad way because I want to see it. I want them to see it as the key to unlocking the door, that the opposite is true. That when you teach, that when you have responsibility for shepherding, a big part of that responsibility is to equip the saints for ministry. And in James it says the ministry without action is dead. We have to turn this faith into action in order for it to have any kind of impact in the world beyond the walls of the church. And I just share that story because that's a frustrating point that somebody could sit under the teaching of good pastors for her entire life and still think that her ministry didn't count because nobody told her to do it.
Yeah. And that's especially challenging because, going and praying in the hospital is not necessarily neighborhood work, but it is ministry to marginalized neighbors, the sick and the hurting and the lost. And so that people need to be affirmed and confirmed in their ministry in the community just as much as inside the church if we're going to see mobilization happen. So you mentioned you had a little throwaway comment there about van tours being a little controversial. Oh. We won't get into all the controversy necessarily, but I'm interested. You also said that was pretty successful. Serve days, similarly, like the one-off kind of serve days where people come into a neighborhood or area of town, also kind of controversial. However, we've talked before, they play a role, a very important role. So could you just kind of talk about the role that you saw that in activating people into the work?
Yeah, I think they're early expressions of what we would call presence or proximity. These three ideas that I believe really sum up place-based work would be presence or proximity, being present where people are, not asking them to come to you, going to where they are in the places where they live, work, worship, and experience life. Posture is another really important. Sorry, I got lost there for a minute. Presence. Posture is another one. We don't come to neighborhoods and to places where Christ needs to be present or is present, and we don't come to tell people and prescribe solutions necessarily. We really come to be first listeners and to and to engage in the things that are important to the people that we're serving, not the things that we think are the solutions to the issue. So posture is really important in how we approach these things. And the final part I would say is perseverance. These things take time. Systems don't break down in communities and societies overnight. There's broad swaths of time and years of disinvestment and marginalization that kind of created some of the situations that we see. So it takes time for things to change, and we need to be willing to invest the time. But you mentioned those two things in particular, like having community tours, or what we called van tours. And by the way, our language has changed over the years because we got a little bit more empathetic with people as time went on as well. And sometimes it's just hard to come up with the words to call things in a way that doesn't sound like
Especially
it's degrading to
these days,
people. Yeah. But we called them van tours because we used a van and we put people in it, and we went to where our community partners were serving marginalized people, so we could pray for them and understand the communities they were located in. But along the way, we would also inevitably drive through neighborhoods that people had never seen or been in before. And the idea behind that was to be proximate, to get present. And these are places people had never gone before, even though they were just a few miles, maybe from where they even lived. And the downside of that is somebody could look at it and say, well, it's kind of like you're kind of like looky-loos or onlookers inside of in a tough place or a tough situation. I like to think there's something educational about introducing people to presence and proximity to need. And so going to where that is, I think the tours was a way to do that. I think these large serving activities also are exercises in proximity. It's like we really can't have a good conversation unless we can see the same things, stand in the same place, talk to the same neighbors, and experience these things together. I can put you for 8 weeks in a classroom at a church, or I can have you for 4 hours in a van. And I get more out of 4 hours in a van than I do for 8 weeks on weekends in a classroom in a church. And not me, but I mean, I think them, all of us together. So those things are fine, I think, to as a teaching tool, as an example, as a way to start introducing people to this idea of presence and proximity. But they shouldn't be the end all. It shouldn't be the completed project. Was to go put on the T-shirt and work in this poor neighborhood and then go home at the end of the day, pat ourselves on the back like we've done something. That's not the case. These need to be on-ramps or open doors into places. And we need to be careful as people who plan and introduce people to communities to do it in ways that are dignified for the people who live there, that are edifying for the people who come to serve, but also foster a sense of partnership and between people. And by that, I mean sameness. We're all made in the image of God. Yeah. These people are you're looking in the eyes of somebody created in the image of God with infinite worth and value, if I could coin the phrase that you use so often, Austin. And they need to be treated as such. And which brings a whole nother discussion about the faith of people who live in marginalized communities as well. But so these types of things that churches traditionally do can be used as on-ramps. They can be tactics to a larger strategy, which is being present with people in a dignified way.
Yeah. And I'll just add, as we've done the work for many years now, there have occasionally been some skeptical people in the neighborhood when we've mobilized large groups of people. They'll make almost some funny comments like, oh, I can tell you're not around from here. But for the most part, the reception is very good. They're happy to see that people love them, that are willing to sacrifice part of their life to come lift up their vision for change and to work on the things that they're passionate and prioritize in their neighborhood vision. I think the key of that is making sure you have a rooted initiative going that people are connecting to instead of it being this one-off thing. So, yeah, you have any questions there?
I have all kinds of questions, but I don't want to get us off any topic. But I know that as I've listened and worked with you guys a lot, I mean, a lot of the beautiful stories you talk about are focusing on the assets that exist in the neighborhoods that you go to. What did that look like for the first time? Like going into something and thinking about that, because so often you're talking about going from like a classroom even, and we talk about these things, but then going in and actually meeting people and seeing what's happening there and starting to support that.
Yeah, I was very fortunate that some of the early days in our neighborhood engagement was built around an assets-based community development model. And that really just means that the intention of this initiative is to understand the strengths and the assets that exist within a community of people, whatever their socioeconomic status or may be, that they are people of worth and value and have something to contribute to their own destiny, their future, and their own lives. So we go in counting assets, not liabilities or problems, and listen to people first. The experts on neighborhoods are the people who live there, not the people who come from arm's length and make decisions for them, or the people that live outside the neighborhood. And we need to respect that and understand that. So I was fortunate to be able to enter into neighborhood work through a neighborhood initiative. And so some of my earliest days, after we did kind of like the neighborhood cleanups and these things that you do to become present, was to sit in those listening sessions that were hosted by the lead agency or the organizing agency, and to listen to neighbors who would gather and they would ask those questions. What are the strengths and assets of the neighborhood? What are the good things that can be built on here? And what are the other things you'd like to see changed or improved? Or what are the things that you as neighbors what's important to you and what are you willing to work on? So I had a chance to be around those tables and to meet people in that level playing field of they're the experts, we're the listeners and learners. We have something to contribute maybe along the way strategically or from a resource perspective or bringing more people to the work, but we're working on behalf of and at the direction of the people who live in the neighborhood. So that was a relationship building activity. I think without the relationships, without being around the tables, without deferring to the judgment and the decisions of neighbors themselves, I think we just become so programmatic and we start employing and implementing our own solutions. And those aren't the solutions that are really appropriate for neighbors and neighborhoods. So I was really thrilled. And that's really where my heart started to move. And it's like, okay, there's a way to do this work that recognizes the worth and value of people and puts them at the center of the work, makes them the hero of the story, and that God's people can rally around them and help them succeed in the things that are important to them. I mean, I wouldn't want somebody to do anything other than that to me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want them to do that in my neighborhood. Why would we do anything else in anybody else's neighborhood? So let's make them the hero of the story. Let's put them at the center of the work. Let's listen well to them. Let's build relationship. Let's express love. Let's be the presence of Christ. Let's shine our lights, and let's help them succeed at what they want to do. That's how I was introduced to neighborhood work. And in seeing that, all the wheels start turning, about, wow, we got to get everybody out here. And not just our church. This is going to take everyone. Everybody who loves and follows Jesus needs to be engaged in work to do this type of change. Or to create this kind of change that's going to be needed, to bring the resources, to bring what's needed to make permanent and lasting and effective change in communities. And therein lies the genesis of the idea of Community One, which was really, I've talked about this before. Community One was viewed as a housing agency for so many years because we chose housing because it's proximate to people. It engages in the lives of people, and it's a distinct need. But really, housing and these programs were just delivery systems for love and people. This is how we're going to move people into neighbors and neighborhoods through these methods. And Community One was always intended to be a platform for mobilizing the church. It just didn't have a church name on it, so we didn't have to fight the territorial instinct of organizations. So being in neighborhoods and neighborhood work is what really drew my heart into this idea of we've got to move the church to the neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's one of the foundational principles of Love Your Neighborhood, a phrase we see all the time. And you have to believe this as practitioners, is that the neighbors themselves are the greatest asset of any given community. So you mentioned Community One. I wish we could get into the whole story. We don't have the time. But moving from being an outreach pastor, then to look to mobilize the church of the city, you launched a nonprofit, operated it for 7-ish some years, and then began to shift focus or put an additional focus into neighborhood revitalization specifically as an organization. Can you talk about the decision-making that went into that, the benefits, maybe even the drawbacks of that shift organizationally?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think... and I mentioned this before, this is important to understand this kind of continuum of services and continuum of programming or continuum of engaging communities for good. And there's 3 elements across this continuum. One is relief, and then the next is kind of rehab, resource rehab, and the third is restoration. And you really need to move across the spectrum. There's a lot of relief going on, and there needs to be relief, because in Matthew 25, there's a place to give people and take care of people in immediate needs. But relief is a crisis, meeting crisis needs. Mm. And, problems with socioeconomics and poverty and generational poverty, these kind of things, these aren't crisis needs. These are chronic needs. These are things going on for generations. We can't treat crisis needs with, chronic needs with crisis responses. Relief doesn't help change systems. We have to get up the scale to the rehab and then up to the restoration. And it's in those places that you find that change begins to happen because they respect systems and ecosystems of people, which we would say would be like in neighborhood settings. We started out with housing, and it was mostly relief-based work, but the principles we were trying to engage with was proximity and presence and engaging and loving people and mobilizing the church to be like Jesus in the community through helping people in the places where they lived. And then we moved from just those kind of housing repairs, immediate housing needs, things in that people had kind of crisis and immediate needs with, to the next level, which was kind of what we would call the rehabilitation level. And in our minds and for our process, that was like, okay, we can fix houses, but if we're going to help people long-term or create more distinct and long-lasting change in people's lives, we have to help them move out of poverty and move into a more sustainable life. Affordable housing is a way to do that. And it's also a great way to mobilize because you can actually, do affordable housing development with volunteers.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to replicate or duplicate services, so we looked for niches in where things were missing in the community. And we found out that housing rehab was a problem. That there were new housing providers tearing down and building new houses, even affordable ones. But there was you couldn't swing a cat without hitting an abandoned house in the neighborhoods at the time. And nobody was doing anything with this just glut of abandoned houses. So we just tried it out. We bought a house on a tax sale, and a dilapidated old house, and we put teams together and we rehabbed it, and it was beautiful, and we sold it. And we just started to develop that idea that we can work in this area of restoring old abandoned houses in the community and then selling them affordably to families to help them start moving out of this poverty and give them a wealth building tool in their lives through housing, home ownership. And of course, there's myriad benefits for the neighborhood as well. But then again, as we move closer to that spectrum, it's like, how do we start addressing needs on a holistic level in a community? Mm-hmm. It's beyond one house, it's beyond one project. How do we start to affect what's going on around this whole community in different perspectives, socioeconomics, economic development, health, youth, all these other things. And neighborhood revitalization, as we had observed, was a way to do that. But doing neighborhood revitalization is really unique work, and it takes really unique people to lead this work, and we need more of them. And Austin, you were somebody who had the heart and the spirit of that and experienced that. And I think God has gifted you with an insight to understand this systems type neighborhood-based work and to teach others to do it as well. And so we had the opportunity to just step into that work again and to start those initiatives for ourselves in places where we feel God was opening doors, creating relationships, and there was readiness for that to happen in neighborhoods. And, we worked together on some early listening work, and then all the magic happened, and you ended up on the team, and we jumped into a neighborhood. And, and I don't want to pretend like we can prescribe the perfect path for any group, individual, or neighborhood. They're as unique as people, and everyone is different. We can provide frameworks and ideas, and we can coach and support, but you have to approach a neighborhood like you would any person. You have to get to know each other. You have to spend time together. You have to be together. You have to understand the dynamics of that, and then to practice good posture and stepping in and resourcing initiatives. So, entering into the neighborhood was our work towards the restoration end of the scale. Mm-hmm. So we would have a full spectrum of services from meeting immediate needs all the way to changing systems in neighborhoods that could help people to flourish and under their own leadership.
Yeah, and while we can't prescribe, I would say it's a best practice, and I would like you to describe the meeting that happened in January of 2017 in the offices that I was just an interested volunteer observer of, because I think that's important for neighborhood-based organizations that are interested in doing lead agency work in a Love Your Neighborhood initiative. What happened in that room is something we need to share. So
we had been, and it was a great time. And we had been working in this particular neighborhood for a while, and we actually used housing as an on-ramp to the neighborhood. So we started doing some housing work in the neighborhood as a relationship building tool and activity. There were other things happening too. There was some listening and some things going on. But we acquired some vacant housing, pulled the neighbors of a whole block together, and introduced ourselves and said, "Hey, if you were us, would you rehab this house? Tell me about housing. Tell me about what you love about this block." We started listening to them in a very specific way around housing. But those relationships continued to grow, and we would invite the neighborhood leader to cut the ribbon on the next house, and we built those relationships. So we knew one another, and over time, we kind of internally assessed, I think this neighborhood has the right leadership, it has the right dynamic, it feels like something's trying to happen here. We don't have to really force this, something's going on, there's people engaged. And so we just pulled the leadership team together and asked a simple question. And what we were attempting and hoping to do is to solicit an invitation to go deeper with them. We didn't want to force ourselves into the neighborhood and say, "Hey, we're here and we have all the answers and we did this housing, but you should see the stuff we can do next." It wasn't like that. It was like, "Hey, we've spent time together. We understand what's going on here in the neighborhood as far as from our relationship. We think you guys have something very special. Would you like some additional help? Would you like to go deeper? What do you feel about what we could do together? Here's some of the things that we might be able to help you accomplish if this is something you're interested in." And we really kind of put the ball in their court to think through that and to then say, "Yes, we invite you to help us accomplish these things." And I think the invitation is really important. It's the buy-in. In those early days, it's the buy-in that neighborhoods can offer is like, "Yes, we need some help." Yeah. And we want you to be the people that step into this work because we now trust you. You've been around long enough. We have a relationship with you. I feel like we can problem solve with you if we hit bumps along the way. We want to go deeper together. And so we had to have that invitation. We really felt before we could go any farther than just kind of the relief and restoration-based work that we know all the neighborhoods that are marginalized really want. We wanted to go to that restorative work, which is going to take trust and relationships over long periods of time. And that has to come from a desire from them to want that as well, not just for us to want it for them.
Yeah, that's so good. And we'll hear more about, or you have heard more if you listen to the TP Park neighborhood session that we'll do that is on this grouping as well. But you'll hear kind of the Genesis invitation to the work that happened after that. That Eric was integral in leading and helping make happen. But we'll leave that story for that one. I got two closing questions.
I have a couple of things too.
Okay, let's do yours before
we just have to highlight that as you're introducing Eric talking about Community One, you picked up your Community One cup and took a drink.
Yes,
so very good product placement. Good job.
Right there, the new brand even.
Oh, great job. I really have three questions, but I think I'm going to just focus on probably one of them because I've heard you talk about this a lot lately. Some of the things that we want the church as a whole, the church of our city, to think about when we hear mobilization. If you're talking to a church leader, what do you really want them to know? I mean, I know you've said all these things, but what's something you'd really want them to know when you're talking about mobilizing into the community?
I think I would start with a question. And I think I would try to understand where they are. And my work now with the foundation and doing church engagement, I feel like I have a lot of listening to do. I have my perspective. I have my lived experience. I can see and judge and try to understand things from a distance. But like neighborhood work, I feel like I have a lot of questions to ask. What's going on, with you? What's going on in your role at the church? What are the expectations that the elders or your council or your leaders have of you? What are the expectations that your church members have of you? What's really in your heart about what you're trying to do and accomplish? How do you feel about this idea that, ministry should happen our time together in discipling and teaching on weekends should be so that when we leave the building, we're equipped to be light shining in the darkness. I mean, I just want to understand what's going on. And I don't have that broad understanding from, there's as many pastors and as many churches and situations as you can imagine. But I need to build some trust. I need to listen well, and I need to figure out how I can help catalyze that type of work inside of a church that I would approach as well. So I feel like the future for me is a lot of listening, and then trying to be a helper and a problem solver if I'm invited to be so. I don't have a playbook.
Yeah.
I think we have the playbook. The life of Christ is our playbook. I don't think we have to look much farther than that to say, okay, is this where we're lined up? And let's face it, the church today is facing a lot of change, and it's just a different world today. I'd love to be able to help to process those things, and look at mobilization, look at the engagement of our community by God's people through the lenses of what they're feeling and experiencing as well, and to do it together. I think being isolated, feeling like you're alone, or you don't know what to do as a leader of a church is really a tough place to be. So maybe we can build community, we can build safe spaces for pastors, and maybe help reset expectations inside churches with members and leaders, and help make sure that the leaders of our churches are healthy and leading from a position of health and a great vision for what their church could do to contribute to the building of God's kingdom in our whole community. So I really can't prescribe anything at this point. I think I'm going to have to be a good listener first.
Yeah. Well, I can say, just sitting in some conversations with you lately, it's been exciting and fun to see, you bring knowledge that you've shared here, just scratching a little bit of the surface of some of the things that I know you've experienced, but also walking away being really excited, knowing that you're the right person in the right seat to connect, I think, churches at the right time. And I'm excited for the future. I'm really excited to be working with you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Well, grand finale. Two questions. They're kind of same coin, different sides. Our audience here is practitioners in a Love Your Neighborhood initiative, or possibly pursuing that role in a neighborhood initiative. What would you tell a neighborhood-based organization leading or providing the backbone support for a Love Your Neighborhood initiative? What would you tell them is the importance of engaging churches in the work?
It's a great question. I think we could talk about that all day. I'll throw a couple of things out. And this was part of my journey too. First, I think it's important to understand that the church doesn't go to a neighborhood with answers and solutions, and we're not going there to save people. We're not going there because God has called us to the poor masses that need heathens and pagans that need Jesus. That's not the setting we're stepping into. You're stepping into a setting with people, many of whom probably have a vibrant, living, stronger faith than many of the people who are coming to the neighborhood. These are people of faith. These are people who love and live and follow Jesus in their lives already. And so not only are they people who might be struggling, from a point of being marginalized and having socioeconomic challenges, these are brothers and sisters in Christ. And that should affect our posture. And it should give us a different spirit of unity among the people that we serve. They're friends, they're partners, they're not our charity case. They're the place that we go to engage in the work that God has called us together to do. It's a restoration idea, restoring holistically people by partnering with them, listening to them, valuing them, and then stepping into the work with them. So I think understanding that up front is really important. You're not saving anybody. What we're doing is we're loving people and listening to people and helping them accomplish the things that are important to them. And also, I would say, on that note, you're probably going to have to be satisfied with small steps. Can you find a church or a group or a team or churches that like we did with our early days, that will just get on board with you? Just one church, just one group. Start with a small core of people Have them work through the process with you, understand it fully, and invite others into the work over time. It's one of those things like building trust with neighbors. You can't rush, and it's not right for everybody to do. And some people are going to be really, really enthused about doing some housing work and doing that kind of stuff because that's where they're gifted. Others are going to be loving to talk to neighbors and being present and doing those things because that's the way they're gifted. I think you have to look at it holistically also as this is a place where people come to express what God has put in them for the edification of their neighbors and other people. Yeah. So let people choose what they do and let them learn through the process as well. Don't be discouraged. People don't come fast because when we get to this restoration end of the spectrum, things feel like they move very slowly. And sometimes there's not a lot of emotional reward when you get up in this end of the spectrum, unlike relief work where things move very fast and there's a lot of emotion behind meeting an immediate need. That's not the spectrum that we're working on. We're working on building into the lives of people over long periods of time. And that just takes time. Be patient and be willing to just receive from the Lord the gifts that he gives you through that process and the rewards that he assigns through that process and the joy of working in relationship with other people. You're probably as hard to work with as you think they are. That's probably what they're thinking. I think it's going to be a slow. I think be intentional. Don't grow weary. Persevere in the work. Always be inviting, and find partners who will go through that with you.
Yeah, and I just would add that when expressed appropriately and correctly, people of the Christian faith are compelled by our Lord and Savior Jesus to go, like you said, following him. And the lady that you mentioned, even praying with people, there's something that should compel us into the correct posture, into the correct work of restorative work. And so as a neighborhood-based organization, that's a volunteer base. Those are people that should be coming with the right posture, with the right mindset, with the commitment, the eternal perspective. And so I think it's really an untapped resource for a lot of communities if we see churches activated. So final question, again, kind of the flip side of that coin. We kind of jokingly, as we were building Love Your Neighborhood, we said we wanted to make it so easy that even a church could do it. So yeah, a little bit of a zing, but also that's our heart. We want to see churches and local church bodies participate in this work. So if there's someone watching that's, deciding whether they want to serve as a church in a Love Your Neighbor initiative, to be that kind of ongoing long-term commitment, what encouragement would you give them to kind of close out our time as they consider the decision?
I think for us, I think the secret sauce for us was to go, to be proximate, to be present. If you feel like a neighborhood engagement process might be a way for you, then engage in one that's already existing. Spend some time understanding what's going on, or spend time in the places where you feel God is calling you. Get to know people there. Learn the fabric of the neighborhood. Attend the neighborhood meetings. Just invest in expressions of love, just to be present with people. I think the closer you get to people and the closer you get to this and the more faithful we are listening to the voice of God, I think you'll know what's right and what the next step will be. This is going to be a journey. We have to break some things in order to get to these places. We have to break paradigms, old ideas, institutional processes, things like that. But there's so much liberation, there's so much freedom, there's so much of the presence of Christ in this kind of idea of going to where people are and places where people, through overtime and through trust and love, you can become part of their community and part of their lives. I mean, I think that's the essence of the calling, to be people who love and follow Jesus. That's how you love your neighbor. And let's call it what it is. Let's not candy coat this. Love is hard. Love costs us something too. But I think that's the richness of our life and our faith, and I think that's what builds the kingdom of God. So go first, and then decide.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for all the work that you've done to love our neighborhoods and our city. And hopefully this is an encouragement and challenge to you, whether you are a neighborhood-based organization or a church or just a person watching, interested in participating in neighborhood work, that you can feel encouraged and strengthened and deployed to love your neighborhood where you are.